Welcome, everyone, to the 18th Annual Tallgrass Film Festival. I want to thank all the sponsors and anyone who's joining us after this incredible screening of Narrowsburg. If you're enjoying yourself, please let everyone know on Facebook and Instagram and tag us at Tallgrass Film and hashtag it Tallgrass 2020. I want to welcome Martha Shane, the director of Narrowsburg, and I'm going to read her bio real quick so y'all can get to know her a little better. Martha Shane is an Emmy. I'm going to redo that. Cut around this Tallgrass. Martha Shane is an Emmy Award-winning director and producer of documentaries. Her films, After Tiller, Narrowsburg, Picture Character, From This Day Forward, and By the Way, have all screened at festivals including Sundance, South by Southwest, Tribeca, Full Frame, Hot Docs, and the Camden International Film Festival. Welcome, Martha.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So I am totally stoked on this film. I think that it's such an interesting, specific story. And I guess my first question is, where did you even hear about this?
The film's co-producer runs a film festival in New York called Rooftop Films, and he rents equipment to other film festivals. And so one of the people who reached out to him was the Queen's International Film Festival, which was being run by a woman named Marie Castaldo. And he rented her some equipment, had some people help her out, and then never got paid. And so in the process of kind of trying to like figure out, and it was weird. It wasn't just like he didn't get paid. It was like sort of like her emails went down, the phone number was changed. It was very odd. So I was kind of trying to help him figure out what the deal was with all of this. And that's when we figured out that a lot of people had been sort of scammed through this Queen's International Film Festival, and then that ultimately that this woman had another identity, another name that she had used when she was upstate in Narrowsburg doing a film festival there. So yeah, I guess it was worth it for me, the fact that he got ripped off. My co-producer got ripped off. I think in the end, I think for both of us, we were like, okay, finding out about this story is worth, the couple $1,000s that he lost.
Well, I'm very sorry about your co-producer's troubles, but it did result in a pretty fantastic documentary. And so, how did you get started working on this? At the end, I was shocked to see the state of both where Jocelyn and Richard ended up in the movie. And so I was pretty shocked that you got these interviews before both of these, before Richard passed away and before Jocelyn fell off the map. So like, how long did it take you to make this movie? When did you interview them? And like, what was like the total time between the inception of it to the ending?
Yeah, it's so crazy to think about that. Like, because we started this so long ago. I think it was around 2010 when I did my very first interview for this. We did 2 interviews back then, which were amazing, but it felt still at that point, the project was still kind of in development. And, it was like, I felt strongly that we really needed to get Richard and Jocelyn on board in order to really make this happen. And it wasn't clear whether that was going to be possible. So but what ended up happening was that Jocelyn Marie was she got in trouble, and she was she got in trouble for fraud, and she was actually deported. But when she was in jail at Rikers Island in New York, I wrote to her, and she wrote back and said, I think I'm going to be deported soon, but this is my email address. So from there we just started corresponding, and she told me that her son had convinced her to do the interview because he felt, because it was a way to sort of put an end to this chapter of her life, tell her side of the story, wrap up sort of her affairs in America in a way. And so she was surprisingly like willing to do it. And then but I had to, fly to Europe because she wasn't allowed back in the US anymore and all that. And then for Richie, he was actually more challenging in some ways. He was very hard to find, even just to contact, because he always had, like, you know, according to him at least, he always had people who were after him, people who, you know, he owed money to, people who wanted to kill him. But as soon as we finally did get a hold of him, actually through his son, he was very friendly, invited me and my co-producer to his house for Italian wedding soup that he made, and introduced us to his cat. And then so there's that side, but then I always say, like, so when he came to the interview, he was like, oh, you know, I don't have much time, like I've got to go meet a guy later, and he like gestured me over, and he opened up a bag, and in the bag was a handgun that he showed me. I was like, what is this guy doing bringing a gun to this film shoot? You know, it seemed kind of like just trying to make it clear that he was kind of the real deal or something, or maybe he just wanted to, you know, make sure I only gave him softballs. But
Well, and that brings me to my next question. I mean, he is very almost confrontational with you, I would say, in what is presented in the film. I can't imagine what was left on the cutting room floor, but you know, when you ask him about Narrowsburg, when you ask him about the fact that that there was no film to show, I mean, he either plays very coy or he's extremely defensive about his legacy in terms of what he left in Narrowsburg. And so what was that what was that like on set to deal with? I mean, obviously the handgun that's a lot, but was it difficult to get any kind of straight answer out of him? Because there's a surprisingly sober moment at the end there when he talks about, you know, with films, you live on after you're gone. It's a way to be immortal in some ways. And so I think that speaks to his ego, but I'm very curious as to what that was like to be in that room and try to get something usable out of him.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the interesting part was, like, I mean, as far as a character, you know, he was such a, you know, straight out of like the movie Goodfellas or something. So on one level, it felt like everything that came out of his mouth, I was really, you know, kind of in love with. But I feel like, and you know, what's interesting is that he was quite actually candid about a lot of things, and some of that didn't make it into the final cut, but he, you know, in response to, like, if I asked him about like someone who he had scammed for like $100,000, you know, someone who he had taken like a lot of money from, sometimes he would just say like, yeah, that person really helped me out. Like, he wouldn't admit like criminal wrongdoing, but he'd be like, yeah, you know, they were very generous or something, you know. And he was very open about, like, I think for, you know, part of his whole thing was sort of having this redemption story. Like, I was in jail, I had a hard life, but you know, and now I've like kind of turned it around. And so I think he was candid in that way, in the way that it kind of like plays to your benefit to be like, oh, I used to be this way, but now I've changed. But yeah, that moment is such a fascinating one, and I don't know if I'm a real sucker or what, but like when Richard is saying, you know, I don't remember, like, I remember we had a big film premiere, I remember I got dressed up, I kind of think like that he in his own mind has kind of rewritten what happened so successfully that he actually does believe that. So yeah,
I have no doubt that he believes that.
he believes, right?
Right. Well, you know, speaking of your interviews, I mean, you have this really interesting talking head interview style where you are projecting essentially through a camera to another camera. You're projecting the image of the person on like another wall behind them. It's a really interesting interview style, and I wanted to know how you came to develop that, and what, you know, you were trying to say by using that technique in the film.
Yeah. So the way it came about was basically, so like I mentioned, my co-producer runs this film festival. And so basically we had a lot of projectors. So we started experimenting to see kind of what we could do. And, for me, it was really about like, I think that, there's so many visual choices that go into every interview. But if you kind of do it in a more traditional way, those choices become invisible. So people don't necessarily think consciously about the fact that like the angle, the lighting is all influencing how you're thinking about that person who's being interviewed. And so I thought by like doing this very like dramatically different interview style that it kind of draws attention to like the artifice and to the fact that like the filmmaker has this heavy hand in deciding how people's perceptions are shaped. And it also just like was fun and kind of played with the idea of like multiple selves and what's real and what's not, what's projection, so that was kind of and it's just hard to think of like interesting things to do with interviews. So I was excited that we thought of something, though a lot of people along the way were like, I hate this. This is horrible. Like it would have been a good film if it wasn't for that.
I thought it was extremely effective. I mean, especially in those interviews with Jocelyn as she's getting really defensive towards the end. And when you just have the camera on the projection of her, I thought it was a really great statement about the image that she'd like to put out into the world versus what other people perceive it as. I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. And as a documentarian, I get it. It is exhausting trying to figure out interesting ways to do a talking head.
Yes.
So this is a perfect film festival film. I mean, I'm sure that you get a ton of interest from film festivals as it pertains to this, but I was wondering, have you been able to showcase this outside of a film festival audience yet? And what's the reception been there? I feel like festival professionals and filmmakers really get like the appeal of a film festival, but I'm wondering what the reception's been outside of that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's harder to say. I mean, the film is available online now, and people, broader audience. And I think most people are like, kind of like, what a crazy story. Like, like it's not quite Tiger King, but it's pretty wild. I think that's a sort of response. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think certainly like, anyone who's writing about it is going to be a film person or a filmmaker who has their like own specific, experience in this world that they're bringing to it. So it's a little, but yeah, I think in general, I think a lot of people like when we were working on it, were like, well, is there really any audience for this outside of like film people? But it seems like, people just love con artist stories and the kind of Music Man-y tale. It's kind of such a classic American thing. And so, so I think people can get different things out of it if depending where they're coming from.
And I love the parallels that you continuously draw between The Music Man and the story of Narrowsburg. I thought it was a phenomenal comparison. And, the idea that it's not the fairy tale ending that you get with The Music Man,
Right.
And the way that I forget his name, but the guy that grew up to become a filmmaker that worked on things like The Jinx, right? Where he's talking about like maybe it was just planting the idea that it was possible. That was enough. Mm-hmm. I thought that was a really optimistic, great takeaway, especially for people who had been so wronged.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I feel like it's so much more interesting, I think, with a story like this when there's that complexity of like, yes, they did take things from this community and some people's dreams were really hurt by this, but other people were kind of given a dream. So I think it's so much more interesting than if it's just like, oh, the whole town got ripped off and we didn't take anything away from it.
Another strength of this movie, though, is that you also have a gold mine of archival material. I mean, the amount you have is a blessing. Like I liken it to Tiger King in that it's an incredible amount to be able to have for the story. So how did you go about sourcing that? Because I know it's a big pain, and I know a lot of documentary filmmakers would love to know about sourcing archival material, especially when it's a sensitive subject for the people in the town that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's really just like so much of the time I feel like, if you hire an archival researcher or something like that, it's very limited what you could find. I mean, everything that basically everything that's in there came from like me getting to know people in the town, doing all these interviews, going back again and again, calling them over and over, begging them to like look through their, boxes in their basement, that kind of thing. I mean, I don't think really anything almost came from just like standard calling up news stations or whatever. And you just never know what people are gonna, I mean, I guess it's lucky if you're making a film about film, you're gonna there's a higher likelihood maybe that some people had some cameras and were filming, because that's what they do. But yeah, so I got a lot of the material from, people in town, some people whose like interviews ended up not making it into the final cut, but they were generous enough to let us use this stuff. And it's just that needle in a haystack thing where someone sends you like 20 tapes and it's like 18 of them are like trips to Disney World, and then the 19th has like 20 minutes of amazing footage from the Narrowsburg International Film Festival.
Well, that's fantastic. And, I'm wondering, do you know if Jocelyn has seen the movie? Has she been in contact since it's come out?
Well, the weird part about it is that I reached out to her, like to the email addresses and called her on the phone numbers I had when when I knew the movie was set to have a public premiere. And her emails are no longer functioning and none of her phone numbers were working. And that easily could be just, those were emails associated with like her old names, like Marie Plant, Marie Castaldo. And one of the things I had seen online was that she was like engaged to be married. So maybe she just gave up those email addresses. And but it's very weird that like I have not been able to reach her to tell her about this. And it makes me just wonder even more, yeah, where is she? What's she up to? What's going on?
Well, as we wind down the interview, the irony of this is that, the people of Narrowsburg were scammed with the first movie with 4 Deadly Reasons, and now they actually have a movie set in their town about their town. So right. What's been the reception from the people of Narrowsburg?
It's been really positive. Yeah. We actually, like, our first big public screening was in Narrowsburg. So for like about 10 years after the Castellanos were there, I heard, I was told by people that if you said the word like movie or like film festival in town, people would just sort of like back away. But then after enough time had passed, they started their own new film festival there, the Big Eddy Film Festival, which is a great small film festival. And yeah, we screened it for probably like almost 500 people over the course of the weekend, which is approximately like the population of the town. And it was amazing. Yeah, it was like, it certainly was a different experience. I think people tend to laugh a lot when it's a broad audience, not in Narrowsburg. There's a lot of laughter. It's kind of plays as a dark comedy in a lot of parts. And so that like, you definitely felt more tension in the room in Narrowsburg, and it's less funny because it's more personal. But I had so many people come up to me and be like, this was so cathartic. Like, this feels like closure. And so, yeah, it was, and really positive response, and also just got to be on stage with like 18 people who are in the film who live up there. So it was pretty cool.
That's amazing. So, as now that this movie's done, what's next for you?
I'm working on a show for like company in New York, a doc series called Generation Hustle. That I think is coming out early next year. So yeah.
Perfect. So, I'm glad that people will be able to support you in your new work. And, is there places that people can be going to support you and with your other films or with Narrowsburg or with your new series? And how can people find you on social media?
Yeah, let's see. Well, I have a website, which is just my name.com, marthashane.com. And I'm on Facebook, and the website kind of like tells you where you can stream my films. So that's probably the best. I'm not like that good at social media. So I'm on, yeah, Facebook, Instagram.
Well, perfect. Well, Tallgrass audience, please go support Martha Shane and her movies. Narrowsburg, brilliant job. Thank you so much for being here, and please go support Martha. You know, films like this really matter, and especially during a pandemic, it's a nice reminder of the world that exists for us on the other side, based in community and rallying together. So, thank you so much, Martha, and I appreciate
Thank
your time.
you. Thanks so much. Happy to be a part.